What is the root issue for that hatred towards our black brothers and sisters? The Lord woke me up kind of in the middle of the night, and he answered that question, and the answer was, because they're my chosen people.
In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to Jerusalem with great slaughter. Many outrages and atrocities were committed against the remainder of the people. It has been estimated that over 1 million Hebrews fled into the interiors of Africa from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Hebrew slaves.
To reconnect to your history, you need to do 3 things. 1, you need to redefine who the children of Judah are according to the old references. Not from the 1900s and newer, because those books tend to have a totally, completely different history in those books. So you have to ask yourself, how did we lose this in history? How did you lose 400,000 people in history? And the reason why I say how did you lose 400,000 people in history is not in the books.
Many people in today's time, many Israelites who don't know their heritage or who they are looking back.
Now it is up to us to have eyes to see and ears to hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come for you to learn once and for all who you are. So-called Negro, prepare yourself for an epic discovery. This may change your life forever. Let's take a closer look at your DNA.
All right, my brother, you proved that the Jews were black using old books, artifacts, and archaeology. But tell me this, how do I know if I'm an Israelite?
We previously discussed the city of Lachish, conquered by King Sennacherib of Assyria, who after conquering the tribe of Judah's city, he then depicted the tribe of Judah on a stone relief to commemorate his victory. And we note that the Assyrians depicted Judah as a woolly-headed Negro. In fact, we also reviewed Lakish's archaeological evidence, which analyzed the skulls of the sons of Judah. And we also found them to be the skulls of a woolly-headed black man. We then noted that a little over 100 years later, these sons of Judah were taken to Babylon and Spain by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. Years later, the Roman general Titus also brought nobles of the tribe of Judah into Spain in 70 AD. These two events set the stage for the greatest scattering of a people group in known history. From here, we read references which describe Jews expelled from Spain and Portugal into Africa and the Americas in great numbers. We also read references which told us these same Jews were then sold into slavery and scattered around the world. Proof. The Negro. They cut off his fingers and thumbs if they caught him reading those old books. After all, those books revealed his true identity. And they couldn't have him learning that now, could they? How else could they justify his persecution, torment, and murder? By the hands of the church, by the hands of the Christians. The church openly persecuted the children of Israel. In fact, they persecuted none other than the royal house of Judah. Now, while Judah was in captivity, Judah was fed from the mouth of the great red dragon and the daughter of Babylon. You see, the daughter of Babylon taught Judah his history, a version of history which began with slavery and the west coast of Africa. This altered version of Judah's history began in 1619 with the arrival of Africans in English colonies on the east coast of what would later give rise to the United States of America. Judah's history before 1619 was simply omitted, covered over with new books containing a slightly modified history. To cover up this truth, modern-day books occasionally omit key parts of quotes which describe the Jews as Negro or black, often by using well-placed ellipses to hide the truth. We can even find modern books deleting entire paragraphs, which describe the Jews as being placed on West and Central Africa in great numbers and then sold into slavery. We can also find modern books acknowledging the common understanding of Jews being black during the Middle Ages, only to propose their blackness as being metaphorical. Family, these are just some of the discrepancies found in contemporary books and reasons why you should go directly to the source and read it for yourselves. DNA of the Negro is arguably one of the most misunderstood DNA stories on Earth. You see, traditional DNA analysis rightfully trace so-called Negro DNA back to Africa. And these relationships are discovered by simply comparing present-day African American DNA with present-day African DNA. And as stated before, this analysis rightfully identifies our deep connection with our African brothers and sisters. However, there's one critical missing component in this type of DNA analysis, and it's called genetic bottleneck.
They drunk at their problems, the US stop. She knows cause she is the same. She's trying to stop playing games. She said, Lord, forgive me. She said, they do not know what they do. They do not see them.
You see, a genetic bottleneck event occurs when a catastrophic event of such magnitude, of such destruction, that it wipes out or greatly reduces an entire population. In other words, the population gets purged. And the so-called Negro has gone through multiple purging events. These DNA impacting events could be an earthquake, which levels an entire city. It could be a megablast from a sleeping volcano, which obliterates all life within 100 square miles. Or, in the case of the so-called Negro, it could be the transatlantic slave trade. Which murdered and displaced millions of people around the world over hundreds of years. Or a genetic bottleneck event could be triggered by an expulsion edict or an inquisition, which evicted and murdered hundreds of thousands of the House of Judah in Spain and Portugal. And so these major events, which caused hundreds of thousands of people to disappear from an entire region, subsequently changed the DNA profile of the surviving population. Most importantly, these genetic bottleneck events impact DNA matches which display on modern-day DNA reports. For example, so-called Negro DNA isn't found among certain modern-day populations in great numbers. And it's because the Jews were expelled from those places. For example, today's DNA reports don't show so-called Negro DNA matches in and around present-day Israel. However, if we instead compare so-called Negro DNA to ancient DNA extracted from archaeological sites in Israel and Lebanon, we find something unexpected. We find so-called Negro DNA buried in the ground of ancient Israel before the time of the Messiah. Beirut, Lebanon. These ancient archaeological dig sites date back as far as 800 BC. Here, archaeologists discovered the remains of multiple people who lived in ancient Lebanon. These ancient remains are assigned ID numbers and dates. In this particular archaeological site in Beirut, Lebanon, we examined one of the DNA samples collected from an ancient grave site. DNA from this ancient individual is labeled SFI-43. This particular individual lived approximately 567 to 404 BC. Researchers compared the ancient DNA remains of SFI-43 to modern-day Lebanese and Egyptian populations, as well as samples taken from a previous report. They discovered something shocking. They discovered the ancient Lebanese labeled SFI-43 was not closely related to modern Lebanese populations. Instead, SFI-43 showed close relationship to ancient Egyptian DNA samples. This is related in the following graph. Notice the dark green dots of the ancient Egyptian DNA are close to the light green dots of the SFI-43 ancient Lebanese DNA samples. The same findings were illustrated in yet another graph. Now, in this particular graph, related or shared DNA between samples is displayed as red marks. Now notice SFI-43 shows red related marks when compared to the ancient Egyptian DNA samples. However, researchers didn't stop there. They added one additional group to compare their ancient Lebanese SFI-43 DNA to. They compared it to the E1B1A Yoruba DNA of West Africa, and they were surprised to see that it was a perfect match. Negroes in Israel before the time of the Messiah. And it's not like we're just finding one person in these ancient sites. In research reports, we find the DNA of our African American queens listed as L0 and L3. That's the DNA of Negroes. And it can only mean one thing. We were there. Ancient DNA which matched the Yoruba of West Africa. What is it doing in Beirut, Lebanon in 567 BC? Family. The Bible tells us life is in the blood, and they're finding your blood in these old bones of Israel. To know if your DNA matches ancient DNA discovered in Lebanon from around 567 BC? Well, if you've taken DNA tests with companies such as AncestryDNA or 23andMe, you can download your DNA data from those companies and upload your data to mytrueancestry.com. MyTrueAncestry.com will compare your DNA to ancient DNA extracted from archaeological sites all around the world. Now, prices may vary based on the number of archaeological sites you wish to compare your DNA to. And no, we're not associated with MyTrueAncestry. However, if you want to know your story, if you want to know if you're related to ancient human remains discovered in and around Israel before the time of the Messiah, then upload your DNA today. And not only might you find your literal family gravesite in Israel, you also might discover you have a family gravesite in Granada, Spain. But first, let's review how the brews got to Spain in the first place. Was indeed the beginning of the time of the Gentiles. The descendants of Rome burned the Most High Yah's holy city to the ground. Nothing was spared, and not one stone was left upon another. The blood of Judah and Jerusalem ran through the streets. Two-thirds would perish by the fire and the sword, and one-third would go into captivity. As spoken by Hamashiach, the prophecy had come to pass. Then let them which are in Judea flee unto the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. And let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. And so the brews were taken to Spain and Portugal by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and General Titus of Rome. Both groups of brews were royal blood descendants of King David. As the following reference reads, and it reads, the Spanish Jews maintained that they had been transported hither after the destruction of the temple by the Babylonian conqueror Nebuchadnezzar. And the next reference reads, the Roman governor of Spain begged the conqueror of Jerusalem to send him some noble families from the capital of Judea, and Titus complied with the request. So we see the footsteps of the sons of King David made its way to Spain and Portugal, where they lived for over 1,000 years. Ironically, it's here in Spain and Portugal where we witness an amazing transformation of the sons of King David. It's here that the sons of King David transformed themselves into a people called Negroes. It began when a brew and his family and their descendants began calling themselves Negroes in the 11th and 12th centuries. And yes, these are the Negroes, as prophecy states, who are scattered to the four corners of the world.
Make way for the brews, make way. The royal blues coming through today. Sons of David, por favor. Call your shofar, call your king, be ready and
Let the prophecy what this wicked world decrees of people trodden down, who they always wanna keep beneath. But the time has come for all those in the world to see the chains being broken. Spirit, mind, soul set free. A Negro, a Negro. I said, como esta tu my Negroes. Praise the Most High, cause we's about to go. Once they found out more about these Negroes, said a Negro, a Negro. I said, como esta tu my Negroes. Praise the Most High, cause we's about to go. Once they found out more about these Negroes. In 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella issue an edict to expel the Jews. They were banished from Portugal, Spain, and for their faith they were treated inhumane. This kicked off the Atlantic slave trade. Our history they try to erase. This fulfilled Deuteronomy 28. Every single curse is black Hebrews living every day. We are hidden Hebrews and every nation. We are hidden Hebrews and every nation.
And now, let's review what we've learned so far. Let's review how to properly research Negro DNA. If you want to find DNA of the so-called Negro in ancient Israel and the Middle East, look at the old bones. Or if you want to find DNA of the so-called Negroes in Spain and Portugal, look at the old bones. And compare your DNA to the ancient DNA extracted from archaeological sites from around the world. And when you do this, using your very own DNA, you may just discover that it was your forefathers who lived in Israel and Lebanon during the times of old. And you may also discover that it was your forefathers who lived in the hometown of the sons of King David himself in Granada, Spain. Granada, Spain, was considered the hometown of the sons of King David. In fact, it was their second place of residence after first settling in Seville, Spain. As the following reference reads and reads, King Alonso, whence we may learn, if we can believe it, that the king of Spain, who had assisted Nebuchadnezzar in reducing Jerusalem, brought an enormous population into Spain, all from either the family of David or at least from the tribe of Judah, and that the royal family resided first in Seville, then in Granada, adding that the exiles afterwards had their numbers greatly increased by the fugitives from the desolation of the Second Temple. And the next reference reads and reads, the numerous Spanish Jewish family of Nasi. Now keep in mind that Nasi is an alternate name for Yaya Negro. So it reads, Nasi or Yaya Negro also traced back its pedigree to King David and proved it by means of a genealogical table and seals. Skipping ahead, a family tradition runs to the effect that the Roman governor of Spain begged the conqueror of Jerusalem to send him some noble families from the capital of Judea, and that Titus complied with the request. Now, we know the famous numerous Yaya Negroes, or Nasi family, moved into Africa, based on Sephardic Hebrew grave sites found in Africa, and based on Bruce surnames in Sephardic dictionaries, which lists the geographic locations where the Sephardic Hebrew name Negro was found. Family. Why were the sons of King David living in Granada, Spain? What was so special about that particular city? Perhaps it was because the city of Granada was given solely to the Druze by the Muslims. In fact, Granada was called Jews' town, as the following reference reads and reads, Granada was entrusted to the Jews alone. And for this reason, it came to be known at the commencement of the Arab Dominion in Spain by the name Jews' Town. And today, we have African Americans matching the old bones, the ancient DNA extracted from Jews' Town, from an archaeological site which dates to around 950 AD, during the early years of the Arab Dominion in Spain, in the hometown of the sons of King David. Family, did you see what happens when you combine your history with your DNA? Well, let's see how you can use your very own DNA to prove you are Judah. When reviewing your DNA, you need to be familiar with history. If old references state that large numbers of Jews were sent to Africa, then we should expect a large part of your DNA to match modern-day African populations. As the following reference reads and reads, Barbert states that in the reign of King John II, and about the close of the 15th century, large numbers of Jews were expelled from Portugal and taken to the coast of southern Guinea. And the next reference reads and reads, the first design of settling there, it was in the year of 1486, but perceiving how many perished in the attempt and that they could better agree with the continent on the coast of Guinea, it was resolved by King John II of Portugal that all the Jews within his dominion, which were vastly numerous, should be obliged to receive baptism or upon refusal be transported to the coast of southern Guinea. And the next reference reads, and it reads, King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Luango, who are despised even by the very Negroes, are descended. And so, with large numbers of Jews fleeing to Africa, we should expect a large percentage of our DNA to match places in Africa. In fact, so-called African American DNA, E1B1A, is predominantly found in high concentrations in Africa in just 2 places. That's right, family. And the first place of high concentration of African American DNA is found in the place where the Portuguese Jews lived, in great numbers. As the following reference reads, and it reads, in 1622, the Cape Verdean governor, Dom Francisco de Morta, reported to the Portuguese king that the Guinea coastal rivers were full of Jews who were masters of the local region and were quite independent of the crown. The Portuguese Jews settled in great numbers in the area of Senegal and Guinea-Bissau, which is the area of the highest concentration of E1B1A in Africa, or at least one of 2 places of high concentrations of E1B1A. The second place of high concentration of African American DNA in Africa can be found in a territory called the Kingdom of Judah, and the territory of Banbara and Lam above it. And oddly enough, old writers describe the inhabitants of this territory as Jews. As the following reference reads, and it reads, the land of Lam, inhabitants. According to the accounts of the people of the neighboring countries, the natives of Lam are Jews. Skipping ahead, the people of Sala and Berseda and Tukur make predatory incursions into the land of Lam and carry away its inhabitants captive to their own countries, where they are purchased by the merchants who travel thither and who transfer them to other countries. And the next reference reads, and it reads, east of the Great Popo begins the Dahomey territory, guarded by the important town of Gliba, known to Europeans by the various names of Fida, Wida, Wida. The old writers called it Judah, and its inhabitants were said to be Jews. And as stated before, the highest concentration of so-called African American DNA is found in places where the Portuguese settled and the Kingdom of Judah. Alright family, let's briefly discuss modern day DNA reports that most people use today. Modern day DNA reports often show the percentages of DNA ancestry contained within a person's DNA. For example, an AncestryDNA or 23andMe DNA report could show someone as 50% Nigerian or 30% Cameroon. However, these reports are missing a critical value which hides your true identity. These reports are missing a value called genetic distance. In general, genetic distance shows the similarity of your DNA compared to another person's DNA. The lower the genetic distance value, the more similar the 2 DNA samples are. For example, a mother and a daughter would have an extremely low genetic distance value compared to a mother and a distant cousin. The lower the genetic distance value, the better. A company named GEDmatch provides these types of genetic distance reports. In other words, we can use GEDmatch to find your most closely related DNA groups. Your DNA groups with the lowest genetic distance values. For some so-called African Americans, the groups with the lowest genetic distance values are places where the Jews once lived. Let's review some additional ways you can use your DNA to prove you are from the house of Judah. A good place to start would be to take the AncestryDNA test. Once AncestryDNA analyzes your DNA, you will get back a DNA report which looks similar to the report shown on the screen. This is where we combine history with your DNA results. Let's use my DNA report for example. Note that my report shows small DNA matches in Portugal, France, and England, less than 5%. However, these are all places from which the Jews were expelled, as the following reference reads. Many Jews also are scattered over this region, some natives boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger. Others are Asian strangers who fled thither either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian, or from Judea wasted and depopulated by the Romans, Persians, Saracens, and Christians, or else such as came out of Europe, whence they were banished, out of some parts of Italy in the year 1342, out of Spain in the year 1462, out of the Low Country in 1350, out of France 1403, out of England 1422. These all differ in habit and are divided into several tribes having no dominion, though both wealthy and numerous, but despised of all nations, and so abominated by the Turks that they are not admitted to be Mohammedans unless first baptized. And so the places which the Jews fled from may display as small DNA match percentages, whereas the places where the Jews fled to, such as Africa, show up as large DNA match percentages. This is where GEDmatch comes in. We can use GEDmatch to find your DNA groups with the lowest genetic distance value, which identifies the DNA mix groups you are most closely related to. In other words, GEDmatch can confirm if you indeed have Portuguese, Spanish, English, or French DNA, as confirmed on my GEDmatch genetic distance report. History. The sons of King David's hometown was Granada, Spain, during the Arab Dominion. DNA. My DNA matches ancient DNA remains in Granada, Spain, from 950 AD, during the time of the Arab Dominion. History. The Brews were expelled from Spain, and many fled into Africa. DNA. My DNA also shows a close DNA match in Portugal. History. Brews then fled from Castile to Navarre, Spain, which is also called Basque today. DNA. My DNA shows Navarre, Spain, or Basque as a close match. Now, keep in mind that these are just a few examples of how history matches up with DNA. DNA fact. Did you know that the tribe whose DNA most closely matches the so-called African Americans isn't found in West or Central Africa? The people whom you most match are the Limba of South Africa, and another group to be revealed in a later video. Do you know the Limba's oral tradition tells that they belong to the house of Judah, Southern Kingdom, and that they were sent into captivity into Babylon, and that they were part of the family of Seneca who returned back to Jerusalem to help rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. In other words, they lived in Jerusalem. Why would so-called African Americans match DNA of a people who lived in Jerusalem, who are from the house of Judah? Now, Limba oral tradition states that they left Jerusalem and fled south with their wives into Africa. However, that's a story for another day. Check the description of this video for more details to come. Well, family, hopefully you can see that our declaration that we are the house of Judah is based on an abundance of history and fact, and it's overwhelming. Yah willing, we will have a follow-up video to further explore this topic. And with that, fam, please like and share this video. And as always, thank you to those who continue to lift me and my family up in your thoughts and prayers. And thank you to those who continue to like and share these videos. And a big thank you to those who continue to support this research through your donations. Thank you on behalf of all those who have learned from this lesson. Well, family, stay blessed, Israel. Take care, and shalom.